We're so excited to have you here today, and we're going to talk about strategies and resources that you can use to bring about more LGBTQ plus inclusivity at your institutions, both amongst staff and colleagues, but also with visitors. And the idea is that this is a session you'll leave again with concrete strategies, and you could even turnkey a version of this presentation yourself at your institution.
Hello, everyone. So this is Roberto Chavez speaking, he, him pronouns. The session is being recorded for those who can't attend, but as facilitators, we're just not going to read aloud names from the chat for privacy concerns. The Q&A and the embodied scenarios portion at the end will not be recorded as well for same reasons. But feel free to put in the chat your name. If you want to put your pronouns, you can put them there as well, where you're coming from, and what do you hope to learn from here? So it's my pleasure to actually introduce my co-presenter, Julia Butterfield. So Julia Butterfield, she, her pronouns. She serves as the K-12 program coordinator at Historic Hudson Valley, planning and leading educational initiatives across 5 historic sites that support students and their teachers. She has worked on inquiry-based programs for all ages at the Allen Memorial Art Museum, the Gilder Lehrman Institute, the Museum of the City of New York, the Morris Jamel Mansion, and the Frick Collection. Julia serves as the NYCMER peer group coordinator for K-12 and family programmers, and Julia is a staunch, lifelong LGBTQ plus advocate in museum education and beyond. Past examples include advocating for family-inclusive language in the workplace with staff and youth.
And I'm excited to introduce Roberto Chavez, who is he, him pronouns, who is a museum educator, poet, and LGBTQ plus advocate. He is an educator for children and family learning at the American Museum of Natural History. He has previously worked at the Intrepid Museum, King Manor Museum, the New York Historical, the New York Transit Museum, and the Tenement Museum. Outside of work, Roberto serves as the NYCMER peer group coordinator for queer peers, and he serves on the queering committee for queer glam workers. In 2024, he was the recipient of the Nancy Hanks Award for Rising Stars by the American Alliance of Museums. When he is not teaching, Roberto visits museums with his fiance, David Kersey.
Thank you. And then just to share, I know it's on the description of our particular session, but this is actually adapted from an earlier session that we created and presented for November 2024 with Rachel Coons, who's not here with us to co-present, but it was centering belonging, LGBTQ plus inclusivity in museum youth programs. And so the three of us have presented before, and we were invited to sort of tailor it also more for staff and interns and volunteers. So here we are. Julia, I'll let you take this part.
So, we want to do a check in with how everyone's feeling. We know this is a difficult time in many cases to be doing this work and there's a lot of threats to inclusivity and accessibility programming right now. So, we have a little Mentimeter that you can access either by scanning this QR code or going to menti.com and entering the code that's on the screen. And you can just put in a little check in about how you're feeling about how things are going doing this work. Let me just open that.
In the meantime, I'm seeing folks are writing in the chat. Also, yes, thanks for the awesome names about the groups like NYCMER Queer Peers. We voted on that. It's a term I use as a term of endearment. And then the Queering Committee. I mean, a lot of people love puns, you know? And then, oh, and Julie, could we put the link in the chat as well
Oh,
for the
sure.
Mentimeter?
And the code is okay. So we have some responses.
And then Julia, I'll put the next code for us after. So if you want to
Okay,
screen
thanks.
share.
Uh, Look at it as a word cloud. So we have, okay, yeah, fearful, rebellious, tired, hopeful, excited, scared. Yeah, just a mix of different emotions, and that's definitely valid. Yeah. And then we have another one as well.
And I'll put it here in the chat for us.
Okay. Can people see the second question as well about what does LGBTQ plus inclusivity look like at your institution? Okay, thank you, Katie, for your nodding.
All right, and the code is in the chat as well. And the reason why we were particularly also wanting to do check-ins with word clouds too is to acknowledge the fact that this is a changing landscape that we've been dealing with as museum workers, museum educators, and museum professionals advocating for LGBTQ plus inclusion. And yeah, there's a lot of different emotions with the news that comes out. So we're grateful for everyone sharing how they're feeling, and we wanted to make sure to acknowledge that. Because so much has changed in the past few months. And then, oh, Julie, it says, waiting for a presenter to change slides on Menti.
Okay. I don't know how to do that.
Oh, also, seeing that there's a meetup group called the A Space sounds awesome. Again, I'm loving puns.
Did I change the slides correctly? Or is it still showing the old slide? Maybe we can just have people put answers in the chat if that's easier.
Yeah, that works.
All right. And then we'll just read those aloud. Okay.
All right, so then for everyone else, just again in the chat, if you want to put in what does LGBTQ plus inclusivity look like at your institution? So researching queer history is what
Same.
it could look like.
All right. Well, maybe people will come up with more ideas as we keep going.
All right.
Oh,
And then also, I've worked in space where it's very grassroots, but no diversity, equity, inclusion, access, or justice training or support from admin, but spaces were, but also space that were also part of the mission. And then advocating for oneself and the community.
yeah. Great examples. So I'm going to go through some ways that we can advocate within our institutions and some of the ways that we can build a case towards doing this programming. So, I think many of us are here because we believe that this is the right thing to do and this is important for ourselves, for our staff, for our visitors. But of course, using statistics will help us advocate at our institutions, even if at times this can be put us in an uncomfortable space and maybe have to tokenize people or categorize people. But I am going to go through some statistics. So, a larger number of Americans than ever identify as LGBTQ plus. And so we want to advocate for these people at our institutions. It's a question of being inclusive towards our visitors and our staff. roughly, and this is especially true of our younger staff and visitors, so roughly half of Gen Zers and millennials approve of same-sex marriage. And, 33% of Gen Z don't live in a household with two married parents. So when we say something like, oh, does your mom and dad at home have this? We're excluding 1/3 of, say, kids at a program. And that's not even counting the kids who do live with two married parents, but maybe have lived with two moms or two dads, right? 35% of teens say they know someone who is non-binary, and 59% support online forums, including options beyond male and female. So that's something to think about when if we're asking for demographic information, say when people purchase a ticket. And close to half, or even in, how we onboard our staff, and close to half of Gen Z and millennials think society is not accepting enough of trans people. So that's a value that they would want to see reflected in an institution like a museum. So what are some options for how we can do this work? So using family inclusive language, again, not making an assumption that children live with a mom and a dad, or what their home lives are like, or not making assumptions about how two visitors who show up to the museum might be connected to one another, not assuming that they're a couple. Having preferred name and pronoun forms for onboarding, again, for something like buying a ticket for registering for a program. These are very useful. Incorporating LGBTQ plus inclusive curriculum and incorporating this into our programming. Establishing group norms. So when we welcome a school group during trainings, during meetings, setting the sense of how are we going to address each other, how are we going to be inclusive. And then also there are lots of trainings and professional learning resources that exist that we can use already. Again, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. There are existing pronoun and preferred name forms we can use. And there are lots of organizations out there that are doing trainings and professional learnings. And you can try and bring those into your institution so that the burden doesn't have to fall on you to be teaching your coworkers. And bringing in these inclusive stories, it's an important way to combat marginalization and erasure. It's a way to bring diverse perspectives and nuance. It fosters empathy and connection. And in studies of why people go to museums, a lot of people go to museums looking for empathy, looking to empathize with the people they come to the museum with, looking to empathize with people from the past, empathize with artists, empathize with figures represented in paintings. And also this reflects the true diversity of the human experience. And of course, we know lots of people also come to museums to learn more about that experience by exploring stories of people in the past, by exploring stories that are reflected in works of art. And of course, at science museums, just learning more about the world. So these are all, so bringing in these LGBTQ plus stories into the narrative can be a real way to connect to the museum's mission and what people are coming to museums looking for. So there are a lot of great resources from the American Alliance of Museums that we will share with you at the end of this presentation that you can also use. So the American Alliance of Museums has put together 3 publications related to transgender inclusion at museums, one for professionals who may be trans or transitioning, one for institutions that you can just send to your HR or your director, and one for coworkers that highlights how you can be a good ally. And highlights of this include, having outlining for HR how to have a name change or a transition policy for staff who may come out as transgender or transition while already employed at the museum or change their name. Guidelines for how to use inclusive language with visitors and school groups. Also guidelines for front of house staff to advocate for their LGBTQ plus colleagues if there is a case where something like that, a colleague is challenged or attacked by a visitor or just questioned in a way that is uncomfortable or potentially homophobic or transphobic. And it just provides lots of examples. So again, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. This is a very comprehensive guide that you can just send to leadership in your organization and say, this is here and this is how we can do this better without us having to reinvent the wheel.
And also, just to add to that too, after you send it to, if your museum, for instance, has human resources or doesn't, or if you send it to administration, to leadership, follow up with them. From my own personal experience, it's good to send it to them, but then we want to make sure, how are we able to use this in strategic planning? How are we able to include this for the education department? for interdepartmental conversation and collaboration. So definitely put in if you feel you're able to put in the follow-up meeting. Can we talk about this? And then another great resource that is recorded and not behind a paywall or member-only wall from the American Alliance of Museums. I had a privilege to see this in person last year in Baltimore. It's Shields Up Safety, Security, and Inclusion for LGBTQ plus programming, talking about safety planning when having a drag story hour at a museum or library and different scenarios that could possibly happen, and how does a small institution, a medium institution, and a large institution, how can they react? So again, there's wonderful things that are out there that we can look at, and people have been talking about for years now.
So again, if you want access to all the resources that we just talked about, so those 3 AAM guides, some resources that we recommend for professional learning, also some affinity groups that exist. Again, you can scan this QR code or enter this bit.ly link. It also has links. It also has our contact information, and it has links from an organization called GLSEN, GLSEN, which is a national organization that advocates for LGBTQ inclusive curricula for K-12 students. And it has lots of resources for things like, again, pronoun forms. You don't have to make up one yourself. It has a calendar of LGBTQ related holidays that you can potentially incorporate into your museum programming.
And it's really important, especially now when places like Google and others don't want to put some commemorative months or holidays. So there are places that aren't erasing these holidays and special commemorations. So they exist and they're here for us.
So we'll switch so Roberto can talk about some case studies and some practical examples.
Hi, everyone. Uh, Again, Roberto Chavez here reporting in. I'm going to fast forward over to our part of the slides, but can you all hear me? Just checking with a little thumbs up. Okay, so for case studies, I've worked in 6 museums. I've been working in museums since 2013, often part-time education work, but and sometimes concurrent. But I have some case studies just to share from 2 institutions more recently of just ways that as staff members, we try to make our programming, our spaces inclusive, but it also could impact positively on staff and interns as well. So some background. I was at the Intrepid Museum from 2021 until 2023. I was on the youth leadership and alumni program team as a museum educator. So I was there working with young people in STEM. So there's a program called Goals for Girls, and it was serving 8th and 9th grade girls for a multi-week program in the summer. And this was covering different sciences related to the Intrepid Museum with the focus of uplifting girls and women in STEM. Now, historically, women were not allowed to serve on the USS Intrepid, so this was a way to bring in women and girls and really help empower. So this program, historically, was also a girls in STEM program, but I was also brought in as well, what's a way to make it more inclusive? What about non-binary youth? What about trans youth? What about questioning youth? So how do we make a historically girls in STEM program in a museum more inclusive, especially when alumni are able to then later apply and become high school and college interns? So again, there's the alumni programs element of that team I was on. So what can that look like? Well, I had suggested a few ideas, and I was very lucky to have the support of past and present managers as well as colleagues. And that's what's really important, being able to suggest an idea, collaboration, test it out, talk it out, and then implement it. So something simple like name tag stickers, modeling pronouns during introductions, piloting and sharing a getting to know you form. And so just back to name tag stickers, imagine in a museum, oh my gosh, what's going to happen if a young person, like a middle schooler or high school, leaves a name tag sticker on the floor, on the wall, on an exhibit display case? Working through that and really encouraging the possibility of that, but focusing on the fact that name tag stickers themselves are just accessibility. If you're having participants for multi-week programs, you want to know their names. And so accessibility helps with learning the names, but also when we say, hey, as long as we can see your name, keep it legible, you can still decorate it, you can draw, you can add a sticker, it's fine. It really also encourages individuality and creativity as well. Then modeling pronouns, like what we've been doing, where it's like introduce yourself and you say your pronoun, it helps. I often joked with some of my cisgender um, straight coworkers at the museum, even though I'm a cis gay man, I'd be like, well, I model my pronouns because I pick up the phone and get called Miss Chavez all the time, or ma'am, miss, and it happens. And so modeling pronouns is helpful. It shouldn't just fall on trans non-binary staff members, and especially can't fall on interns. That's not fair to them. So another big highlight was doing a getting to know you form. Julia mentioned GLSEN, so GLSEN, the championing LGBTQ plus education for K to 12 schools. They've been around since the 1990s, and they had their own pronoun forms for years. I didn't know that. I was creating one thinking, well, what if one of our goals girls later comes out as a trans man? What if a goals girl is actually non-binary? So, what name do you want us to call you? What pronouns can we use during the program? Do you feel comfortable with us singing happy birthday to you if your birthday falls on the program? And so, can we use the names that you gave us and the pronouns you gave us when we call home? And this just helps establish trust. But I felt like, as an educator, I was like, I want the input of our interns who were once goals girls themselves. But before we go into that, let's look at what happened when we did the name tag stickers. So, how do we address people and still respect the fact this was a girls in STEM program, even just addressing them? Hey, goals, girls, and peeps, what's up? A simple little thing like that, just to help the young people feel seen. And then giving the options, you could put your pronouns there on your name tag sticker. And on the right side of this is a picture I took after first week, where we had some of the students would share their name tags afterwards, put it on one particular classmate's journal, and that became part of their daily journal that they had on ship at the museum. And that itself is part of that creativity, individuality, but also community building within the young people too. So you could see here there's a name, Indigo, she, they, him, Pickles. There is, for instance, Jana was here, she, her. So there's all these different names that are here, but also pronouns that eighth and ninth graders at the time were sharing with us and each other. But it wasn't just for the young people, because remember, I mentioned there's a pronoun form I wanted to create. So I asked our high school and college interns. They were once goals girls. I said, can you look this over? And they said, yeah. And they gave a seal of approval. They said, we like this. So they then surprised me. They said, can we try this? Can we fill one out? Mind you, we've known them for a while. We know them. They're here. We've already interviewed them. So I was like, yeah, okay, sure. And I found out then and there, we really got to know them even more. They're not just using she, her pronouns, but the three interns, she and they pronouns, they and he pronouns, and he and him pronouns. One of our interns, who was a college-aged student at the time period, um, came out as a trans man with a chosen name different from the name assigned at birth. And then when I addressed, oh, would you like us to use this moving forward? He said, yeah, and please call me this name, just not when you call home. And then said, oh, I realized you're the first adults I've told besides my besties. And for me and the team, we were humbled. We realized we are so focused on just the students or participants, we forgot those around us, our own interns, our own young staff members too. So just reminding that something you create for, let's say, students or participants or families may benefit your own teammates. So here again are some photographs from Goals for Girls 2022. You could see me and said college intern about to kayak in the Hudson River. Okay, actually, that intern took pictures while I was braving the waters there. You can also see some of the artwork that was created by students, eighth and ninth graders, where we said, and this was my boss, Jen Elliott's idea, what would a Rosie the Riveter look like today? What does a Rosie the Riveter poster, inclusive Rosie, look like now? And this was what they created. Stop the hate, stop Asian hate, a hijabi Rosie, as well as a Rosie the Riveter with a bandana with many different pride flags. Again, eighth and ninth grade girls and peeps. So that was from my time at the Intrepid Museum, uh, 2022. But moving forward, we're going to go to the next museum I was at, and I'm actually at currently, American Museum of Natural History, something of a case study just regarding building community. So how do you build community with each other, with your students and the educators, the teachers, uh, staff bios, and also pronouns. So I want to first give credit. This is Kylie Walsh, she, her pronouns on the right side. And then on the right side is Kelly Owen, she, her pronouns, holding a dinosaur puppet. Brilliant science educators. Kylie, the environmental science teacher, climate resilience and climate hope educator. Kelly Owen, amazing paleontologist, insect pinning demonstrator, and earth scientist. And they were having the issue, they want to connect with the students, the third, fourth, and fifth graders, that they could be seen outside of their instruction, their cl weekly classes, uh, get to know us, who we are as people. So they implemented staff bios. So what's a staff bio and how can you use it? Think about staff bio literally as an about me that is fine to share with students and families. What are your hobbies? Fun facts, favorite colors? Pronouns, we suggest optional. You may not want your own staff to feel pressure to come out. So always make that very explicit. Pronouns optional. And also photos and captions where they can share pictures of pets or other things. But staff bios, these were posted inside and outside of the classrooms. And originally they were actually called teacher bios. I sort of pushed for them to be called staff bios because, well, what about the teaching assistants? What about folks who work in animal care and elsewhere? Expand it and think about what is the workforce community as well. And this is something that you could really sort of advocate for in your institution. What if your institution has very little connections to the LGBTQ community, gender, sex, and sexuality? Well, not everything has to be tied to collections. It could be tied to the current community, not just the visitors, the donors, the funders, not just them, but the staff members. So staff bios and pronouns are a great way to use that. And the next slide I have is actually a picture from after we use them for my third and fourth grade classes for the first week. On the left, you have my coworker and colleague, Lily Miller. She pronouns, awesome non-binary botanist and horticulturalist. And then on the right side, you could see my staff bio too, where I put an Ecuadorian flag, an American flag, and the Pride Progress flag. I joked with the students. I put a pigeon because I'm a New Yorker. Um, but you could see just different aspects of these staff bios. So how they're colorful or they're inviting for these children, students, families. In the center of this slide is a photo I took right afterwards. I noticed my third grader, so 8 years old at the time, um, put stickers, but also drew a panda with a heart, and then drew a rainbow and wrote she, they pronouns. I pointed out to Lily and Kylie, who are my co-teachers. I said to them, wow, this is big. This is the youngest I've ever had a student come out to me and you, us. And I said, we as LGBTQ plus educators and allies like Kylie, for instance, we have a responsibility to said students to give them the autonomy, the safety that they can feel so they could learn and then just be. And so again, something that is what we may think is small may have a big impact. And it may impact staff members and interns who are going to come in later. So building community with staff bios, I highly recommend. But what about if you're not just engaging with students, guests, visitors, donors? What if you just want to meet up with your coworkers for a drink? Or what if you want to see your own queer peers and allies inside the museum when it's not as busy, or for the holidays? Well, affinity groups and employee resource groups are wonderful opportunities too, and they are possibilities. So at the American Museum of Natural History, we're lucky that only recently is there an official employee resource group called AIM&H Pride. they're internally called community resource groups because it's not just employees, but volunteers, which the American Museum of Natural History has many volunteers, as well as the graduate students too. So it's opened to a very large amount of people, and it's dedicated to the LGBTQ plus community and allies. Now, again, employee resource groups legally cannot discriminate, so it has to be open to everyone who's working at the museum. But will they share the same values of the mission? That's what's important, uplifting the LGBTQ plus community. So you can see me, I became involved there. First year I started at American Museum of Natural History, planning events. So I'm over there with my old colleague Brandon Bryant, where we are tabling at the museum community resource fair, benefits fair, and we're talking about like come join AMH Pride. And then later on, there's the holiday party picture of us. I'm wearing reindeer antlers because I like a costume. But what does an employee resource group do? What can you do? It's just meeting up monthly, having a drink after work, also providing non-alcoholic options to for staff members, thinking about different schedules at our work, different work days, and also being able to find mentoring and mentoring circles in a way. So employee resource groups, affinity groups can be so beneficial for morale boosting. But for a group like ours, we also wanted to go to Pride, wanted to march in the Pride March. So this was the banner that we designed. It was called American Museum of Natural History. It says museums are for everyone. Had to go through a whole process with communications and everything. And that's good. There's collaboration for that. So this is a banner to be carried. How do you get ready for Pride? You have to think about who gets trained for the groups, who's paying for the for our contingent to go. Do we march with other groups or so? That's where the collaboration comes in and the planning, but also the fact that it's a physical walk. There's miles to be walked, so you have to bring people together. I'm happy to share. Last year was the very first time that the American Museum of Natural History had AMH Pride go to the New York City Pride March. We were so excited that other museums were there with their contingents, with queer glam workers, with the American LGBTQ plus museum, and we were on the march as well. So in total, because this is employees, volunteers, grad students, and our loved ones, there's 53 of us. We felt amazing. But in order to get here, you also have to think about the fact that it's a physical thing to do. It takes and when we think about identity first community groups. So here is a photograph. It's accessibility and belonging. This is from Dyke March 2022. Actually, a former colleague of mine and Julia at two separate museums. We wanted to go to Dyke March. My friend said, "Well, I don't feel very comfortable standing very long, having arthritis. So it's like, this is tough for me. I can't do this." Dyke March offered accessibility marshals. And the idea is you get use a wheelchair for free, just sign up for this. So we did that, and you can see in the very center, our friend plus her girlfriend are able to be involved with Dyke March 2022. So there I am. Ashley, the girlfriend of Delia's, is there, as well as my partner David is there. We all took turns. That's part of the building community. Pass the baton, work together, self-advocate and advocate. So I was inspired by Dyke March 2022, and I said, well, who needs accessibility um, uh, at our contingent? Well, put a form out. Please let us know if you would like any help, like getting a wheelchair. Can we get a wheelchair from the museum and bring it to NYC Pride March? Well, thankfully, because partnered with security, HR, and our colleague Tova Frank got to self-advocate for themselves. Tova and their partner Lee, which they could see them on the left side, they joined us for Pride. They're able to stay the whole time with us, and so you can't leave folks out when you are going to be doing events for affinity groups or employee resource groups. So keeping that in mind. I hope that these three examples of one from the Intrepid Museum and two from American Museum of Natural History can help inspire, but also remind us what we need, especially now more than ever. Again, reminder, coming out, it's all these different things. It's personal, political, empowering, frightening. We don't know where people are on their journey, whether they are leadership, management, whether they are front of house, back of house. We don't know where they are with their coming out, whether it's continual, life-changing, ongoing, or just part of their day-to-day. And we may not know the visibility that we have and how we'll impact not just people who pay to come to the museum, but people who work there too.